This video corresponds to section 29.2 on our textbook that deals with aggregate supply. As a quick overview to the overall model, it's known as the AS-AD model, which stands for aggregate supply, aggregate demand. It is the key macro model. So in our aggregate economy, the key macro model to explain fluctuations in the business cycle, and to also make predictions about GDP, price level, and other economic factors. So we know from micro, I'm going to be inserting a letter or letters in front of each of these. So we know we have our, in micro, I'm just going to do, we have our demand and supply curve. We have our price, we have our quantity. So for example, it could be cars, say Corvette. So we have the people who demand Corvettes, the people who produce supply Corvettes, and the price of Corvette. So we could have a Corvette for $50,000, and maybe the quantity, equilibrium quantity, is 100. But in the macro model, we're putting all goods and services together. So we can't have a price like $40 or $50 or $40,000 because they're all different prices. So in the macro model, we're using a price level. And you can think of this price level as an average price. The total demand in the economy, we're going to call aggregate demand. Aggregate is in total. So this is the total demand for all goods and services. And similarly, we're going to have our aggregate supply curve. In the macro model, we're going to call the short run aggregate supply curve. Sometimes it's just called aggregate supply, but there are two types of aggregate supplies, long run and short run. And on our x-axis, it's going to be our quantity of real GDP. So it's a quantity of total output. Jumping ahead, but just to introduce it here, we can have a curve that's called our potential GDP, also known as a long-run aggregate supply curve. So suppose $10 trillion, that's our potential of real GDP produced in the economy, let's say in a year. Our short-run aggregate supply, our short-run aggregate demand, the intersection of those two curves, that's where we are today. So if our short-run aggregate supply curve is here, and aggregate demand curve is here, this is what we're actually producing. So in this model, we're actually producing, and our potential GDP, which is the vertical graph, are the same. So this would be what's called a full employment equilibrium, and we'll look later on when we can be above or below those levels and being in the recessionary gap or inflationary gap. But it's getting back to the basics right here. Just in this section, we're going to go more deeply into the short-run aggregate supply. In the next section, which I'll do in class or another video another day, will be on the long aggregate demand, and then we'll put it all together. So we have our price level, and we have our quantity of real GDP. Just as was done in micro, if price goes up, if price increases, the producer sellers will be happy, so they're going to increase the quantity supplied. So in the macro level, when price goes up, we can think in the macro sense, it's going to lead to an increase. It's going to lead to an increase in the short-run aggregate supply. This is the quantities of goods that are produced. So if prices are $80 versus $100, as price goes up, businesses are willing to offer more goods and services for sale. So this is a movement along our curve. So an increase in price leads to an increase in the quantity. The key word is the quantity of the short-run aggregate supply. As also we've done in micro, we're going to do again, we're going to shift the supply curve. So the question is, what causes a change in the short-run aggregate supply curve? And by change, I'm talking about what causes the curve to shift. These are external factors not relating to the price level. One of them is a change in potential GDP. If potential GDP increases, it's actually going to drag the short-run aggregate supply curve with it. So let me just put, I'll say our potential GDP is here. Our potential GDP shifts by changes in real factors in the economy. Suppose there's some unbelievable, amazing technological breakthrough. If our potential GDP shifts, so look at this point, let's say at a price level of 120 and our output of 100. If our potential GDP shifts, then our short-run aggregate supply curve is going to shift along with it. So if potential GDP shifts, it's actually going to also cause the short-run aggregate supply curve to shift with it. Other factors that cause a shift in aggregate supply, well, you think businesses, if they make more profit, things are going to be good. So anytime there's a change in cost and input cost, if there's a change in costs, input costs, so for example, wage, the nominal wage rate, what's paid to workers, if that decreases, bosses will be very happy, they can make more profit, so that will shift the short-run aggregate supply curve. Other input costs, so costs for oil, let's say, any type of resource, and along with that could be materials as well. Sometimes this could be 2A, nominal wage rate, 2B or 3, other input costs, and thirdly or fourth, if we use A and B, a supply shock. And I'll do supply shock on the next page. There are two types of supply shocks. There are both negative and positive supply shocks. So let's think about a negative supply shock. Think of maybe some major hurricane or a storm. If it disrupts supplies, so this is before the hurricane, say in the Gulf of Mexico, a large hurricane level 5 comes in, it closes a lot of refineries, damages some offshore oil platforms. So one of our inputs, oil, there's less of it, therefore that's going to decrease the short-run aggregate supply curve. There are also positive supply shocks. Something that changes in a positive sense the supply. So if there's some more resources or a technological breakthrough, that could cause the short-run aggregate supply curve to increase. And just reinforcing a concept. question is, why does the short-run aggregate supply curve slope upward? Well, it's obvious that if prices go up, producers are happier, and therefore they'll supply more goods. So the quantities we saw of the aggregate supply in the short run increases. But the question is underlying that, well, what does that mean about costs? Because if prices go up, say selling price goes up by 10%, and if costs go up by that same amount, well, that's going to lead to no change in profit, everything else equal. So therefore, if prices go up, why are businesses going to feel better? So to explain why the curve goes upward, if prices go up, we're going to assume the cost do not change. And why would that be? And if costs don't change if prices are higher, then it's not a question we don't have a change in profit. We do have a change in profit. Our profit would increase. And that's why at higher prices, businesses are willing to produce more. Let's think why that's the case. So in the short run, if selling prices increase, businesses are certainly happy. Let's think about, because they can get more money, but let's think about their costs. Their costs, big one is the nominal wage rate. Well, many employees are on fixed contracts, annual contracts. As is rent. So nominal wage rate, you lease some plant or office space, it's also on a fixed annual contract. So if prices go up, well, the boss, in the short term, they don't have to change the nominal wage rate. They can pay their workers the same. So there's no change, no additional costs here. If there's a lease, if they're paying $3,000 a month leasing an office, if prices go up, no increase in the lease, increase in price associated with no change or small change in costs does lead to additional profit. And this is why we can see that the aggregate supply curve in the short run is low. And this follows up a notion from Keynes. Keynes' belief was that prices in the short run are sticky. That's his term for saying they are slow to change. And by here, talking about prices, probably a better way for me to say that was, let's not do price, sorry. Let's do wages and input costs. In the short run are sticky or slow to change. So if prices go up, it doesn't mean that wages and input costs go right away as aforementioned. Last couple of items to summarize. The question is, what does real GDP depend upon? Depends upon the real factors in the economy. So if you think about the factors of production, labor, land, capital, and this we mean physical capital, machinery and equipment, and entrepreneurship. In the short run, only one that's variable is labor. In the short run, it can be changed. The others take more time the entrepreneurial talent at any given point today. Bill Gates, there's not going to be another Bill Gates tomorrow, maybe a couple of years, but right now we have that talent. Land, of course, is fixed. Capital, we can get more capital. Physical capital, machinery takes more time to acquire those items. But labor, generally speaking, you can hire and fire more workers more quickly. And that concludes the video for section 29.2, so please fill in all notes relating to section 29.2.